Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. And on today's show, I've got Mark Smith. Mark served with the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, had tours of Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, shared a bodybuilding stage with Phil Heath. He's a two-time British Strongest Disabled Man, two-time Arnold Disabled Strongman Classic winner, English Strongest Disabled Man, world record pulling 2 trucks at once, amputee footballer, and author of Strength of Mind. So welcome onto the show, Mark.
Hey, mate, you all right? Thank you for having me on.
I'm very well, thank you. We've given you the accolades there. What haven't you achieved?
I've just been very lucky. I had some good days, but yeah, equally, you could turn up to a competition and not perform on the day, and I wouldn't have those titles. So yeah, it just so happened that on those particular days, I was able to sort of perform to a standard sort of good enough to win those competitions. But yeah, I just got very lucky on a few occasions. So,
well, you say luck. There's obviously a lot of hard work that's got to go into the behind the scenes.
Yeah. I think anything that I've done, all of those sort of sports, I've dedicated myself to. I've lived that lifestyle. I've sort of learned off of people that have been involved in those sports a lot longer than myself, and just almost tried to be like a bit of a sponge and sort of take up as much knowledge as I can get from those people. So yeah, although I've been very fortunate to sort of achieve those things, that's not been on my own. That's been through being open-minded enough, I suppose, to listen to people with experience and learn from them, and get the right sort of techniques when it comes to log pressing, and get the right sort of diet advice when it comes to bodybuilding. And with the football, I've watched a lot of the lads as to the height of their crutches and all the tiny little details. So I've always just sort of paid attention to the details, and then tried to sort of live that lifestyle, I suppose. More so that, you know, if come the end of a competition, wherever I've finished, I know that I've put in every ounce of effort that I've got in the months leading up to it and on the day, and whatever happens on the day happens. But I know that I can come away knowing that I've given everything. So thankfully that mindset has paid off on more than one occasion in the last few years.
How has your body adapted, or should I say evolved, going from sport to sport? Because obviously I've followed your progression on social media, but for people that don't know, obviously there's a massive evolution between you as a soldier to losing your leg to then going into bodybuilding and then becoming an amputee footballer.
Like I said, I think it's just picking the brains of people that are, far more experienced in those fields, and having a determination. I've always been a very stubborn person, in the fact that if I've said something out loud, I have to see it through and I have to do it. So yeah, I've just tried to, for each of those, they're very different sort of, very different diets, very different training programs, but the same sort of mentality, the same sort of determination. So with the strongman, obviously it meant eating a lot more, training a lot heavier, doing different events, and that was what was necessary. So that's what I sort of put my body through. And likewise with the bodybuilding, it was a case of low carbs and, fasted cardio in the mornings and stuff like that. And yeah, I've just sort of, I think the human body is adaptable, and maybe obviously the paths that I've been on since have shown that.
And You talked about low carb and things of that nature. Do you, as an individual in that discipline, do you have a temperament for like mood swings because of it?
I would say I was a lot happier in strongman, obviously eating a lot. Yeah, that was my sort of, that was my strong point. I could happily eat the calories that was needed for that. But yeah, I struggled with the bodybuilding. I had an opportunity to help the disability category grow, to give it more exposure, but that meant stepping on stage frequently at different competitions that wanted to include it. So it meant dieting almost for 9 months continuous. So yeah, I was very fatigued. I know when I sort of trained for my second competition, it was straight off the back of my first one, and I was sort of pulling into lay-bys for sleeps and stuff because I was just exhausted. So yeah, I was just sort of running on empty towards the end of that year of bodybuilding. So yeah, I would say my family probably noticed my mood increased when my calories increased.
And was it a happier change to move away from that up just for one of those, the downsides of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd only ever intended to do one bodybuilding competition. I just wanted to do it to show how far I'd come. Obviously, when I was in hospital, I was sort of, in my eyes, I was weak. I could barely sort of hold myself up out of the bed and stuff. And so for me, bodybuilding closed that chapter because it was the opportunity for me to stand on stage and show how far I'd come. Whereas, yeah, the strongman definitely sort of suited me more. Yeah, to sort of spend 9 months with like your stomach rumbling in an evening, like that wears thin quite quick.
And why did you want to transition out to strongman and then try out at football?
I'd grown up playing football. I'd played sort of Sunday league since I was 7 years old, right up to joining the army, and then I was fortunate to play for the regiment as well when I was in. So football was always my sort of first love, and I possibly would have gone straight into it after losing a leg, but I tried it, and I could still remember being on a football pitch as an able-bodied player, and I think it was too soon to go from one to the other. So I had a few years away from it, but I always sort of thought in the back of my mind I'd come back to football one day. And I think the time that I did eventually go back to football, enough years had passed to fully embrace being an amputee. So when I did step back on a football pitch, I didn't sort of I didn't miss the right leg so much anymore. I'd adapted to being an amputee.
And we were talking off air about ultimately the scarcity of clubs. In an ideal world, then, Mark, would you love to play for your club that you support?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the difference is amputee football doesn't have the luxury of, an academy system of players coming through. It's, in a way, other people's life-changing injuries can benefit the league. It's quite hard to convince amputees to come off their prosthetic leg and go onto a pair of crutches because a lot of people see it as a backward step. And I think a lot of people feel vulnerable taking a prosthetic leg off. You're exposing your amputated leg to knocks and falls and stuff. And so even though obviously in the military in particular, we've got a lot of amputees, a lot of them, I think in the entire league, there's only 3 of us that are veterans. A lot of lads are put off by the thought of being on crutches. So yeah, in a way, 8 teams is probably the limit because the number of amputees that actually want to get involved in football isn't huge.
Do you think, in terms of viewing utilizing crutches, and I'm gonna give an open-ended question to you now, Mark, as going backwards, but also it's a competitive sport, so ultimately some people are just seeing it from one side of the argument, but they're not looking at what you're very passionate about, because I can see it just from Instagram videos that you take training very seriously, even in lockdowns and things like that. Do you think they should maybe take on board the competitive aspect of it a little bit more so? Because it's not if you're going to be on the crutches beyond, just for argument's sake, that it goes into extra time and penalties, like maybe in that, and maybe 130 minutes tops, and then you put your leg back on if that is you're that way inclined.
I think, only speaking from a veteran's perspective, the mindset from the physios down to the lads is very much, we need to get you up on prosthetics, and almost when you're on them, people are then too proud to not be on them, myself included, before I got involved in football. So once people have progressed onto that, crutches were seen as, in a weird way, lazy at Headley Court. You know, what you're doing on them, you should be on your prosthetic. So I think, yeah, it's hard to undo that when it's been ingrained into you for so long. So I think that puts people off. But then, whereas the lads who have lost their legs through cancer and stuff and have got no choice but to be on crutches, embrace it better. You know, they're not so fussed about the prosthetic legs, because some of them aren't fortunate enough to be able to wear them. But in terms of it being competitive, I'm confident that if you could get some of those lads that are dubious about being on crutches, if you could get them on a football pitch for half an hour and let them enjoy it, the satisfaction that comes from it, they'll look at the competitive side rather than, I'm not wearing my prosthetic, but it's getting them onto the pitch in the first place that's the hardest bit, I think.
How do you think you would go about that? Do you need to have some sort of sexy hype video to kind of show, and I don't mean sexy in that way, but I mean in terms of to make it, you show like the best bits of it in a 30-second video, maybe a 60-minute video at top, just to showcase pretty much, you know, a bit like Match of the Day does with their opening sequence. It's you see the teams, I'll call them logos, but you know what I'm talking about, the insignia of the club's crest. You know, that's Match of the Day is coming on, or the FA Cup or something like that. Do you think it needs for the FA to be a little bit more embracing of one of their forms of football, because ultimately they're trying to grow the game in the women's part of the portion? Ultimately, there was a newspaper article, I think about just 2 weeks ago, in the Guardian, of disabled people being kind of marginalized out because they've been forgotten about. Here's one of the biggest sports in our country. Here's your opportunity to make that and kind of be the leading figure to showcase that we're trying to push for, well, they're talking about equality and inclusion. Put your money where your mouth is.
I think it's not particularly well advertised in terms of trying to recruit new players. The clubs, in terms of social media, aren't particularly proactive in terms of trying to get new people involved. The EAFA never really seem to be sort of advertising for new players or giving new players an opportunity or an advert. But then equally, I think, because it's not a Paralympic sport, because it's not a part of the Invictus Games, it doesn't really get much recognition. The amount of people that follow myself, that before I'd made that transition into amputee football, didn't even know it existed. And I think that's still very much the case. You've got a couple of sort of proactive amputee footballers as individuals, trying to sort of showcase it and put it out there. But on the whole, it is just word of mouth. So I do. If you go to a limb fitting centre, there's no mention of it, and it's. I do feel like they're missing a trick. It could be much better advertised, and yeah, I think the professional clubs themselves, obviously that have been good enough to embrace amputee football. Obviously, there's ways they could go about sort of.
Well, in some cases, because I said to you, and these are the only ones I can think of to mind. Obviously, you got Arsenal, you got Everton, you've got Man City. They've got, to just use Manchester and Liverpool as the example. You've got the whole city at your disposal to be. Ultimately, it's going to be, and I'll bring in myself into it. I could never see myself putting on a blue shirt because I'm a diehard Manchester United fan. It would be very, very difficult to do that. But from a competitive standpoint, if I want to progress in the sport, I've got to put that ego to one side to be able to kind of, yes, it's your heart of hearts. You don't want to do that. But if you want to be able to progress, you need to be able to put that down. So obviously Arsenal has the lucrativity of having London.
Yeah.
In theory, they could become, they're not going to do this, but you could be the London club, the Liverpool club, Manchester club. Ultimately, you play for Peterborough. They could take that the area and kind of say, well, this is the club for the area, but put the badge to one side and you'll represent your region.
Yeah, I definitely think the club badges and people's affiliations with who they support make a difference. But at West Bromwich Albion, we've got a couple of lads that are Wolves fans. So it can be done. You don't. I think that's the thing. A friend of mine said to me, why are you playing for them? And it's like, but they've given us a platform to play, and I think there's this misconception that all professional footballers support the team they play for. Like they don't. It's an opportunity to play football.
They probably go, well, I'll go out on a limb here, and there's no pun intended with that. They go where the money is, and ultimately there is no loyalty to any badge now in professional football. Obviously, there's some, you could say, of Marcus Rashford is the Mancunian through and through, and he's a diehard Manchester United supporter, and you've seen it in when he's been berated on the pitch of like shouting at Maguire as the captain. It's like, you need to defend somebody who's been sent off because of obviously what transpired before. Obviously, I was a supporter. You embrace that because that should be the captain doing that, not the striker. So he's probably one of very few that are like that. They've come through the academy, and they're very proud to have the, I'll say, the fortune to be able to wear the club colours. But like you say, it's few and far between.
Yeah, and I think that has been a thing. Obviously, trying to get some other lads involved, and you tell them their closest clubs, but they might be a Liverpool fan and they will not play for Everton and stuff, and it does definitely make a difference, I think. So there's a couple of obstacles to get over before you can get someone along to a training session. As to, you'll need to take your prosthetic leg off. You'll need to get on crutches. A lot of my friends don't spend any time on crutches. I've probably spent more time on crutches since I got into football than I did in the years previous. But then I understand that, because to go into disabled strongman meant going in a wheelchair. So I had to be open-minded enough to go, okay, well, I've made all this progress. I've stood on a bodybuilding stage in a prosthetic leg, feeling relatively sort of able-bodied, and now I've got to accept going back into a wheelchair. So I understand people not wanting to go back onto a pair of crutches, but actually, those people that love football will fall in love with amputee football. Like I now wish I'd done it sooner, because I love being back on a football pitch, and I'm sure those lads that were passionate about it before, they'll soon forget that, oh, my prosthetic leg's over there on the side of the pitch, and they'll just be enjoying being on a football pitch. And I think people that have come to watch have been surprised just how, the same with yourself in the wheelchair basketball, like just how physical it is. I think that's the thing that people have been surprised at the most. Like, you're missing a leg and you're on crutches, but you're not holding back when you're going in for tackles and stuff.
No, you can't. That's
No,
how you get hurt, because
yeah,
you can't go in at 50%. And the same with, and then in the able body game, you're not going to go, if you go in at 50%, you're obviously going to come out on the wrong end.
yeah,
And they're obviously trying to clamp down on some of these tackles, but ultimately that does take away some aspect of the game. But obviously it's got to evolve, and there are odds with the VAR system. Obviously it's not perfect, but you got to go through some teething problems to get things right. Ultimately, it's not working right now, because, well, I think they've been a little bit too, in my mind, the offside thing has been looking like with a fine tooth. That's too extreme. It's
yeah,
like, it's not if the person would be able to see that with their eyes, so you're choking things off. Whereas things that they probably should go back against is like tackles and foul play, and little subtle things of like diving for
yeah,
penalties. Do those little things, and then people will stop doing it and stop trying to do what's part and parcel of football. Because you hear stories of people, that's one reason somebody get, can you dive in the box, which
yeah,
is not right, which is clear and out, what's the word, gamesmanship, and ultimately cheating. And I didn't know the difference between that until I was working in education and was taught in GCSE PEP lessons. So obviously an adult can learn, but that's that grey area of sport. But what you were talking about, Mark, of being comfortable going backwards for a performance gain,
yeah,
the harder one is probably, you tell any amputee, come on, you shouldn't be in a wheelchair long
yeah,
term, shouldn't be on your crutches long term. But you need to be a little bit open to the days that might be an occasion that I don't have my leg on today because it's a bit sore, it's swollen. For those days of that you can't. But what you talked about is a good point, because the military is, well, I've never experienced Headley Court, but all the new one that's in Yorkshire, for that matter. But ultimately, it's a lot of people probably would not survive in that kind of rehabilitation environment. But obviously, you guys are used to it because it's normal. It's like, you're going to do what you're told,
yeah,
because we want to get you back up and back to normality. But I think maybe where it's maybe doing a disservice to you as an individual, it's trying to get you back to what was normality. It's like, you don't, in some cases, you don't have one leg. The person might have two prosthetic legs. You no longer have two
yeah,
normal legs. So that's probably where, oh, I can't relate because I was born with mine. So, but that's maybe where, in some circumstances, the general populace outside of the military is maybe a little bit more embracing,
yeah,
because they're not following orders. It's like, you're going to go from here to, pretty much like sport is. You're going to do is I'm going to tell you when you're going to eat. I'm going to tell you when you're going to go to sleep. I'm going to tell you when you're going to train. And I think they did a documentary on Hadley Court, and I was surprised in terms of, I'd quite like to work in that environment, because you do the I'll use it loosely, the clientele have to do as they're told.
yeah,
Whereas somebody coming up rocking off Joe Smith off the street doesn't comply by all the rules of
yeah,
You know, you probably see it by some of the gyms that you've gone into. I want to change, but I want to be on my terms.
Yeah.
Whereas I think how I've adapted my coaching now, no. You want to change, you're going to play by my rules because your rules didn't work. Whereas the environment you come into, yeah, easy done. I'll do as James tells me to do because ultimately I want to get from A to B and he knows what he's doing. So there's obviously two different worlds. I've probably been in both camps because of sport and then obviously the real world. But when I've talked to other athletes, we talk of excellence over here and mediocrity is acceptable here, which I think normal, and I'm generalizing because I'm not saying everybody's average. That standard needs to be raised because if you're accepting being average or below that for that matter, which you do talk to, if you do speak to amputees in the Facebook communities, especially the Americans, it's always like down here.
Yeah.
It's all doom and gloom. It's like your life's not over. Some people it's a second chance. It's the door and the opportunity is wide open and you just got to take it with both hands. And ultimately, I think the best people that I've seen, because I've been in sport, has been the military, because they get to that fork in the road. And for the majority, I've yet to see somebody go the wrong direction. It's been, this is an opportunity. I'm going to take it. And it's ultimately, I'm not going to say a second chance, but an opportunity to excel in something different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I've spoken to a few people sort of on social media that have recently lost limbs and stuff, and they see it as a negative. And I've said if you can find a sport that you become really passionate about, you'll actually look back on your amputation as a positive. And I think that's the thing, is trying to change someone's mindset into not seeing it as the end of, that's the end of my life, like I'm never going to do anything again, into this is new doors opening for you. And if you embrace it and you accept, yes, I'm missing a limb now, but if you accept the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start making the most of that second opportunity. That's where I think sport sport was massively encouraged at Headley, and I think that's been very sort of therapeutic for everyone. But also, it channels you. You're looking forward. You, rather than sort of looking back at what you've lost. Obviously, your military career, a limb, two limbs. You then start looking forward to the next challenge, and you get stuck into that, um, and then you you set yourself new goals, so you're always striving to improve and better yourself, and rather than, you haven't really got time to wallow. And I think that's the positive side of being told what to do, because Headley Court was very much a case of you get out what you put in. If you put in the hard work, the rewards are there. With getting on the good prosthetic legs, with getting on the running blades, with doing the sports, there was always reward for your efforts. And having spoken to lads sort of in strongman and stuff since, that obviously lost it through different circumstances, their rehabilitation has been a much sort of lonelier path on the NHS. Obviously, they haven't got that residential stay. They're not surrounded by other people in the same situation. You might be a young 20-year-old lad that's lost your leg to bone cancer, and the other three people in your hospital room are in their 80s and they've had heart attacks and strokes and stuff. And so you feel like the worst sort of injured person in that room. Whereas for me, I was in a room with a double amputee and a triple amputee. So I was the least injured person. So I felt very positive and lucky from day one. So I think our rehabilitation sort of plays a big part on your mentality going forward. So it's got its positives.
Do you think some of that could transfer across? And I'm talking in non-COVID times now, Mark. Do you think because obviously the technology of legs of the military pumping probably billions into the prosthetics, and ultimately it's evolved no end of good for the general populace as a result. Do you think some of that residential thing should come on board? Because I could see the positives of it, of the camaraderie, of ultimately people uplifting you in your circumstances, because the military is a brotherhood and so is sport. But if you're on a downer, they kind of go, come on, we've got something to look forward to. We're all gonna hate I almost call him a drill sergeant, but be it the warrant officer shouting at you to exercise. That's probably not changed from the day that you had all your limbs. So you still hate that individual no matter what. So obviously for me that would be an ideal job. It's like, well, I get a shout at you for a living, and you have to obey my command, or obviously you get reprimanded. But obviously in the real world, or the outside the military, people are not going to take that. It's like, no, you're not going to talk to me like that. I've got some say. But I see the positives of what you were saying, because if ultimately they're looking forward and not having a tendency to look back in forms of regret, obviously there's things that you can look back upon that are positives, or if there is an adverse moment in your past that you've learned from, that you can put into place in the present, you're going to use it. So I think with a lot of people, able-bodied or not, and I think this is where when I now do work as a coach, you can kind of see some of these conversations materialize, because they can't picture something positive because they've never experienced it. And I think if you can give that positive reinforcement and motivation or inspiration going forward, you can give them those little breadcrumbs or spark to kind of look forward. It's positive reinforcement. I like that. I want a bit more of that. And then you don't have this occasion where, what if I had my limbs again? And I was asked a good question a couple of days ago when I was interviewed. If you had two legs, what would you do? What would you do differently? It's like, well, I've not had the opportunity for that to be. Obviously, there's been circumstances where that's been the case in my life as a teenager and slightly younger. I had that identity crisis of, I want to be like everybody else that I've friends with who've got all their limbs. And I think I had a conversation with my mum a couple of days ago. She kind of wishes I had two legs because life would be a little bit easier. That's comfort. That's convenience. But what I'm getting at for the listeners is, if I am not missing a leg, I'm not saying I wouldn't be able to become a sports person, because that was my dream and that's passion. If you're passionate about something, you make it a reality, and you're going to work your damnedest to make it happen. But the opportunity to get where I achieved is very, very becomes a lot harder and a lot smaller. So the opportunity, probably the doors don't open as easily. I'm not saying Paralympics was a walk in the park, because obviously it's not. I think that's where the media probably does a disservice to it, that, well, Headley Court and now Yorkshire is pretty much I'll call it a football factory, but in terms of it's being able to churn out athlete on an athlete, and ultimately I think the governing bodies are very happy because they don't have to do as much work.
Yeah,
because they're being signposted athletes, pretty much they're pre-made, they're ready to go. You just have to give them the skills, and that's it. So the governing body is probably going to be a bit lazier, which is not a good thing. But ultimately, they've got another alternative. But where I think it does the Paralympics maybe a disservice, from my opinion, because you might not agree, is that a service member becomes injured, they walk straight into a Paralympics. It's like, well, me being born with this, I've got a problem with that. And ultimately, as any competitor or competitive person would be, I've got something to say about you just strolling into a team, and be it's one of those things that it probably be it was a kick up the arse I needed a couple of years ago. I've seen a documentary with an ex-service member trying to make Beijing in 2008, because I got a bit not lazy, I got a little bit complacent, and it was all the impetus of probably somebody kicking me up the arse to kind of say, no, James, if you don't pull your finger out, this person potentially might take your place.
Yeah.
Obviously that didn't happen, but that's probably the competitive nature of the beast. It's one of those things that you do need an external motivator. And this is probably where I say it's bad, because it shouldn't take that to be on the television to motivate me in only my second year in performance sport to want to make what is the pinnacle of disabled sport, period.
Yeah.
It's probably going to take, I don't know why football's not, I know obviously you got your CP football in the Paralympics. I don't know why amputee football's not in it, because we're one of the least severe disabilities in the games, and it's the popular game in the world. So it does surprise me that a little bit, and ultimately you would think, the Americans have got a fairly good amputee football team as well. So it's surprising it's not in the Invictus Games to at least try it out to see if it would gain the popularity of, say, wheelchair basketball, or I know where rugby is popular because they get smashed into each other, but
yeah.
So
I definitely think the Invictus, obviously the majority of people that compete in the Invictus Games are amputees, as a result of sort of IEDs and gunshot wounds and stuff. So there's the numbers there for every country that's a part of the Invictus Games to be able to include an amputee football team. But yeah, obviously I'm too far down the pecking order to be involved in those decisions. But I personally see that it's possible. I suppose it's like any sport. Maybe it comes down to politics, but I think it would be a good addition to the Invictus Games. I don't know so much with the Paralympics. I know they've only got slots for so many different variants of football, and I think blind and cerebral palsy football are above amputee football in terms of how many nations play it. So I think that's what holds it back from the Paralympics. But Invictus, I think, could certainly embrace it, because the majority of people that go to the Invictus Games are amputees. But yeah.
Do you think it needs to drastically make a push? Because I've known about it before you played it, and I've looked at it a fair few times, and it's obviously the tribalism that you raised as well is an issue, because you talking about West Brom, you got West Brom, Wolves, Birmingham, Aston Villa. So you got a lot of tribal things just in the West, and I'm not excluding all the other ones in lower down the pyramid, in British football. So no offense to any clubs I didn't mention, but obviously you're going to have tribalism in these urban areas of people being kind of, well, I'm not going to play for that club because of what's on the crest, and worst case scenario, you could always wear your own top underneath.
Yeah.
If you're that way inclined, and ultimately not obviously do a celebration that you take it off. But if you were that way inclined, then it's not technically touching your skin. You're wearing something underneath, if you wanted to go to that extreme. But I think it's going to take something like that's drastic of pushing the game to showcase it as, well, disabled sport is marginalized anyway, period. And you just look at wheelchair basketball, that we're one of the best countries in the world, but it's still on the red button. So it's one of those things that I think I was asked after my first games by ATV, are you okay being marginal? Not my, this is my words, not theirs. Are you okay being like a second class citizen after football and rugby? Like, well, but you take it like that, but as an Olympic or Paralympic sport, your time to shine is every 4 years. I think with social media, you can showcase it 365, and pretty much 24/7. So I think it gives you an opportunity to showcase something different, because there's different aspects of it. Obviously, ball control is more important for you than say a able-bodied person, and it kind of puts it in perspective as, well, you've got 2 legs, why can't you shoot the ball with both feet?
Yeah.
Whereas I've seen some of the drills that you were doing using the outside and inside of your foot to and that's probably something you've picked up from other players just by watching. And thought, well, let me take different aspects of it, because it obviously makes the ball do slightly different things. And my argument for that, and why I said that, is an able-bodied person should be capable of doing that, to be able to use both their feet, because they've got no excuse to not practice it over and over again. Some players can use both. They've obviously got one that's more dominant than the other, but which we all do. But when you bring it back to the disabled level, what's your excuse? I think I surprised people with the wheelchair basketball, because is the height the same height? Is the goal, the shooting goal, as high as it? Yeah. I've never gone as far to say, well, shouldn't that person be? You as an able-bodied person, say LeBron, for argument's sake, he can dunk the ball. The closest you're going to get as wheelchair player, I think one of the Brits is 6'6", so he's still quite way underneath the goal.
Yeah.
And still able to score. So it's like, no, it didn't bother me at first. It's only when you think of it, it's like, well, yeah, we are quite lower to the ground. And one of my cousins did play professional basketball. So when he came over to the UK, he got in a chair, and a few of the players did as well, thinking, shit, this is hard.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, because you can't jump. So you're taking away a lot of the advantage they have, because they're not being able to gain a little bit of distance just by the jump. It's like, no, all the power is in your upper body. But I think for me, and this is where I've used my disability as an advantage, I think because, be it through family and coaches I've had, they've had the open-mindedness to look at the disability as, okay, instead of looking at pity, is a disadvantage, where can we utilize it to be the benefit? So I was a swimmer before I went to Dundee Sport. What can we utilize as James's strength? So me being obviously having it all my life, as I said earlier in the episode, I've quite well developed up body wise. So they kind of said, you changed the narrative for me. Instead of me kind of saying to myself externally and internally with the language I was using, as I'd rather be anything but disabled, let's look at flipping the script. And I think I was asked, I think it was not me personally, but it was a great question asked about a year or so ago in one of the amputee groups. What are you thankful for? And I said, if I hadn't been disabled, I wouldn't have had my sporting career. Obviously, we won't never know, but I talked about opportunity. That opportunity presented itself, and I fully embraced it eventually with both hands, because me as a teenager, I kind of went, what's your intentions by what you're saying? As why don't you try disability sports? I'm very much probably like you were when you first started. Well, all I've ever known is able-bodied sport, so why would I go over here?
Yeah.
And we're talking only 20 years ago. So it's come a long way, Paralympic sport as a whole. I think football, as a platform that it has, should want to elevate one aspect of the game because of, you know, the state of affairs that we're in terms of, you know, showcasing racism to be bad. Where's your opportunity to show equality? What's the word? Yeah, equity and inclusion, to give people the opportunity that if they've never seen amputee football, here's the opportunity to do it. And be it, it's going to be obviously in the lower pecking order because it's not able-bodied and more people have underlying issues. But why not be able to put them in marketing campaigns of, well, you can't be doing any worse than your namesake at the moment.
Yeah.
So that would be their way of doing something positive for their fan base in terms of, well, why don't we get behind our local amputee side at the moment to try and make them there's only 8 clubs. Why not try and make it the best in the country? And then it's something for the clubs, the fan base to be proud about. So on this note, there's no gripe in terms of, I'm not having a go at you, West Brom, but I think you probably have a go at your own club anyway, in terms of being where they're at in the table right now. But obviously for Manchester City, maybe a little least of their worries, because as of this moment, as we're recording, riding high, top of they'll probably win it. As every team below it seems to be throwing any opportunity they can to squander that. So for them, obviously they've put a lot of importance on their women's side and got them involved in the marketing. Why don't reach out to the amputee side? And this is a conversation I had with a behavioral science lecturer at Chester University yesterday. It's like more to around weight loss, but why don't you get every aspect of each community, so Black, Asian, white, disabled, fat, slim, and talk about their journey with food and ultimately how they overcome and what do they do with exercise. It's a great opportunity because football is front and center in most people's psyche, what we talked about off air, of distraction, of people putting a lot of importance to free to air, Sky, BT. So there's billions in that particular sector. Why not try and, at least if there's no games being played, leverage its popularity to at least people, it's at least if they didn't know about it, it's a talking point.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's I think Brighton and Portsmouth on their last kit releases both had an amputee footballer along as part of the kit launch, which I think was the first time, and the only clubs that have done that. But so some clubs are putting it out there, but yeah, like you said, obviously the women's game now is being put more on a level playing field, and maybe in time, sort of amputee football can get that same recognition.
Well, it's if a team like, I can't remember what league Portsmouth's in now.
League One.
So it's not a big, in comparison, it's not a big club. That's no offense to anybody on the South Coast, but it's not of the days when it was playing in Europe.
Yeah.
And same with Brighton. Obviously, it probably punches above and beyond its weight, and Bournemouth when it was in the Premiership as well, because it's not got a big capacity. Obviously, got a big fan base, but I think these bigger clubs obviously need to look at themselves in the mirror, because you've got a global presence. So Arsenal, Manchester City, Everton obviously is now punching above his weight now with on the able-bodied side, because they've had some investment put into them. And it took Manchester United a long time to get involved into women's game as well, which I thought was a little bit of a mistake in my belief, because you're letting Manchester City gain a march, thus control of the city, because they always both like to have a little bit of a PR battle as well, who owns the city and who actually owns the fans. But you can't fault them from a women perspective. They put the investment in. They've got all the infrastructure. They've got some of the best players in the world. So does Chelsea. But here's your opportunity to maybe, because you were talking about only 2 leagues of Turkey and Poland that are professional. Obviously, the Turks, as I said to you off air, more to speak, the Istanbul's clubs of Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, Besiktas are obviously fanatical in following their club, irrespective of what it is. That they'll follow amputee football, wheelchair basketball, it doesn't matter, but volleyball, whatever that club is, they follow it.
Yeah.
And probably the Polish are probably very similar. But when it comes to us, I think in the UK, it's more tribal towards sports more than the club. And we've obviously tried to be like Spain, Turkey, in terms of, like that's one club, it's one badge, one club. And I think Manchester United tried to get into basketball, it didn't work because they weren't successful, and obviously they pulled the plug. But this we're not talking about multiple sports, we're talking about the same thing. The ball is the same. Ultimately, the only aspects of it is certain aspects of the game, but the sport is still the same thing. So we're obviously still beating the same drum of inclusion. But what I would probably implore the clubs to look at is give people opportunity. Because it's like, well, it's one way to get your closer to the fan base. The players could probably try that out, hopping along with one leg.
Yeah, I know they did it before the Champions League final a couple of years ago. Because, I mean, in Poland, Robert Lewandowski is like an ambassador for amputee football. So they've got a huge name in Poland to attach to the sport. Whereas obviously like that's something we haven't got over here. Someone big to really sort of push it. But yeah, apart from obviously the club badges that the teams wear, there isn't someone of the level and stature of Lewandowski over here.
Do you think it needs that? Or do you think through having more people like yourself that are willing to talk about your story and how it, because ultimately that's obviously what people like, when it comes to, I'll call it reality, we'll call it reality television, but social media, people want to know every ounce of your existence. Do you think it's more through that's and showcasing each individual has had a slightly different journey to get where they are now, and why can't you be the next person? So I'm pretty much doing the PR but thing for somebody if they're just listening, but be it storytelling as a hype video from that perspective. As we had, the Phoenix Rising for the documentary with the Paralympics, very great success. Obviously I know that there's going to be a second one, that because off the back of it being so very successful of showcasing the run up into Tokyo. But do you think it's going to take something like possibly a Netflix or an Amazon Prime to be able to maybe showcase the story behind the sport, to be able to kind of maybe the FA take note. Oh, we do have pretty much of a untapped gem.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would, like you said, obviously, just in one club, you've got people that have had diabetes, they've had bone cancer, they've had motorbike accidents, they've stepped on IEDs, so in terms of like a documentary there, you've got 10 different stories, and all probably equally interesting to people that are watching. I think something like that, like a documentary of sorts, to give people an insight into the sport and into the players. That would be. I watched the Phoenix Rising documentary. I thought it was brilliant. So something like that is never going to be a negative towards the sport. It's only going to help it, I think. But yeah, it's obviously getting those
We're
opportunities.
talking about this at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We can see. I know people can't see my fingers, but you know what I'm intending by what without me having to physically see it. But and this moves me nicely to my next question for you, Mark. Obviously, you released a book about your story. Would you ever contemplate that becoming some sort of documentary or film?
I mean, to be honest, I was more just sort of flattered that people wanted to read it at all. Obviously, that's ultimately why I wrote it. I had friends of mine sort of say, you should put your experiences into words, and at the time, obviously, I didn't really have the sort of time to dedicate to writing a book, and then the first lockdown happened, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. But yeah, I mean, just the fact that people want to read it is sort of overwhelming in itself. But yeah, if something like that could be progressed on to something else, like sort of documentaries and stuff, then like I said, that can only be a positive. So I'd jump at the opportunity.
And you talked about it, writing it during lockdown. How difficult was it to put your I'll say memoirs to paper? Because I've been ultimately asked to do something similar. How challenging was it for you, just for like personal preference for me to experience?
Um, the process of doing it, I found sort of quite therapeutic, to almost like taking a big weight off my shoulders, to sort of process it all properly, and to also, there was a lot of fond memories. Obviously, my time in the military, I was able to recall a lot of memories and stuff, and so there were parts of it I really enjoyed, sort of reminiscing. Like I said, the chapters sort of talking more about the operational tours and life sort of in the barracks. I enjoyed that, and then obviously there's harder parts, and there's parts. Um, I wanted to give people an understanding as to what's made me tick, what sort of manifested the stubbornness that I've got and the determination and things. And so I actually sort of wrote about my upbringing, which a lot of people, even lads I'd served with, never really knew. Because the day that I started sort of basic training and onwards, that was a fresh start. Like, it was a clean slate. So everything from school and growing up, that was closed. So to put that in, I felt was important, because it meant people would understand why I'm so hell bent on pushing myself. But yeah, equally, I was nervous, and I was worried that, again, that stuff that I'd kept sort of locked away at the back of my head for all these years was there. And I was worried that sort of people I'd served with would think less of me, and so there's parts that I found difficult to write, and there's parts I was nervous about people reading. But then, on the whole, I quite enjoyed reliving those like, for example, sort of strongman. I always looked forward to the next competition, as opposed to sort of enjoying the moment itself. If I'd won a competition, I wouldn't sort of celebrate. If it was on the Saturday, I'd rest on the Sunday, and come the Monday, I'd be training for my next one. So I was always just the next thing. Whereas writing about it, actually let it sink in and allowed me to process what I have been lucky enough to do. So I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'd ever sit and write another one, but I enjoyed putting it all down, and I was glad that I did. I did end up reading it back a few weeks back, just to sort of see how it had turned out. Obviously, I had an editor who sort of reworded some of my sort of spiel, and just to sort of see how it sounded. And I was happy. But yeah, it's quite. I think the first page is the hardest, just getting starting, and then yeah, after that, I was spending around 3-4 hours a day sat at the laptop typing, and I had a whole checklist, a timeline from sort of my teenage years all the way through to now. And then I'd have like little bits coming off of sort of memories I didn't want to leave out. So yeah, I'm glad I did it, and I think it was almost like a form of counselling in a way, because it enabled me to talk openly. Probably, it was probably easier to type in words as it was to sit here and say it to someone. I didn't want to have a ghostwriter that sat there with a dictaphone and I just sat here and spoke to them. I wanted it to be my words. So I felt sort of quite in control of how it turned out. And but yeah, if you get the opportunity, I'd definitely do it. Obviously, it's you've achieved plenty of things, and where you talked about your mindset and the coaching and what got
Well,
you
I think my stumbling block, Mark, and this I'll be vulnerable with the audience, is pretty much what you're talking about. It's how you're going to be judged. Am I comfortable with airing my dirty laundry, as I'll put it loosely like that? But and is ultimately, is it going to make somebody enact something that they need to do? But be it's a motivational tool to for them to change. And I've always struggled putting words into writing anyway, in terms of what I mean. How does it come across in the tonality that I want it to do? Whereas spoken word,
yeah,
depending on how you present it, it's frustrated, it's anger, it's sadness. You can where am I going with this? You've obviously got your influences from Southern Europe, because I'm using my hands a lot, but to be able to communicate, whereas with written format, it's somebody's interpretation of your wording. So you're never going to get away from that, because until it goes into maybe an audible book, which maybe is something else that you might want to do, and obviously that's you speaking your words and you doing it that way, it takes on a different meaning. But let me ask you this one then, as a question: if it was to ever go to become a movie or a film, who would you want to portray you then?
I can't say that's something I've ever thought about. I honestly don't know. I don't know who would want to. God knows. So
The only person I can think that's bald is Jason Statham. That's the only person I can think of. But he might be too old by then, though.
Yeah, I'd take that as a compliment. So yeah, maybe my early years he might have to wear a wig, but yeah, God knows. So
maybe it comes up, maybe it doesn't. My final question I like to ask all my guests then, Mark: if you had to sit down with any athlete, dead or alive for that matter, who would that be and why?
Mike Tyson.
Okay.
Oh, like I've read his book a few times. I've watched his documentaries. Obviously, grew up sort of watching him fight, and like I could ask that man questions all day. Like it, one of the most exciting sort of heavyweight boxers to ever live, I think. Yeah, if I could meet anyone, and have the opportunity to talk with him, I think it would be Mike Tyson. Yeah, he's. I suppose I've got different sort of admirations for different people in different sports. For me, growing up, I was a left back from sort of 7 years old, and it was Stuart Pearce. I loved. He epitomised everything about being an English defender. So it was Stuart Pearce on a football pitch. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, as someone in films I'd grown up watching, someone that had been Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia. So I suppose there's different role models for different parts of life. But I think if I could sit with anyone and have a conversation, I think Mike Tyson. I think the bloke's fascinating.
That's an understatement, that one. And I'll do. I don't normally do this, but I'll do a follow-on question from that, because you said Mike Tyson. At what time? Because ultimately he's been multiple different people.
Towards the end of his career, once he'd sort of mellowed out a little bit and stuff, like you said, I suppose he's been multiple different people, but he's one of the books that when I read it, I enjoyed every single page. Like the man's had like such a fulfilled life, an eventful life. But obviously youngest ever sort of heavyweight world champion, and he's had his own sort of setbacks and stuff. And but I was able to sit with my children when he had his exhibition fight with Roy Jones Jr. recently, and to say to it, like, that's Mike Tyson. To sit with my own children and then be able to watch him, obviously be it a lot older, but I think probably him towards the end of his career, once he'd sort of mellowed out slightly, be an interesting person to share some time with.
Did you watch the interview after the fight of it, when the announcers obviously talking to Roy Jones Jr.? Like, what was it like to get in with this? And then obviously he took over the mic. It's like, well, I'm a lot older than he is, and he's which was I shared that because I thought it was not comical, but it was a playful side of Tyson that you'd probably never seen before. It's like, well, he's got a point because he's 10, 15 years older than Roy, and I was obviously seeing some of his social media stuff in the run up to it, thinking this dude's in his 50s and he looks like he's in his 20s. So some people, it should put you to shame. It's like that he only needed lockdown to kind of go, well, obviously it was on the cards, but it was like a switch had been flicked on, and it's go time. So this is my final question to you before we wrap up the episode then, Mark. If you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Good question. I think my own sort of mentality on the last few years, and something that I've said before, is anyone can achieve anything. It all comes down to mindset and how much you want to achieve it. The things that you've achieved, they've been down to what makes you tick. How determined you are, your mentality and determination. And I think if you want something enough, regardless of like what sport it is, or it's achievable, you've just got to be prepared to put in the effort. And ultimately, I think that's what my avenues have sort of epitomized since I lost my leg. Is I've been able to achieve anything because I've put in that effort and that determination. The sort of the long and short of it is that I think anybody can do the things that I've done personally, with the right sort of positive attitude.
So once again, Mark, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed speaking with you.
That's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Heath: an athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.